Ukraine on air, and we welcome you from the heart of the Europe, and we continue telling you the truth about Russian invasion in Ukraine. This is the 21st day of the war, and here's the anchor, Nick Starkov. Good evening. And we start from the first news. This is an update provided by the Armed Forces of Ukraine about Russian losses that occupant suffered in Ukraine. And you see just right now on the screen, the calculation is provided by Armed Forces on Ukraine, and it shows that the total losses, the death range stands 13,800, then tanks 430, armored personnel vehicles over 1,300, artillery systems 190, multiple launch rocket systems 70, anti-aircraft warfare systems 43, aircraft 84, helicopters over the 100, vehicles, just automobile vehicles, meaning over 800, boats and larger ships 3 items, fuel tanks 60, and unmanned aerial vehicles of the operational tactical level 11. Also, it provides the information about the special equipment, over 10 items. And this is the situation as of now, and I want to say that this calculation is provided and the count is complicated due to the ongoing shellings and intensity of fightings. Also, we want to come to the first material, about the shellings in Ukraine. Let's go for it, and let's start from the situation in Ukraine over the shellings.
103 children were killed by Russian bombs in Ukraine, 6 more than yesterday, when the world leaders were discussing the situation in Ukraine. Explosion in Kyiv. In one of the central districts, the rocket hit the residential high-rise building. It partially collapsed. There are wounded. In Chernihiv, the Russian army attacked people who were buying bread. 10 killed as a result of explosion. The fight goes on in all directions. The Russians are widely using artillery and rockets against civilians. They are bombarding Sumy, Kharkiv, Mariupol, Zaporizhzhia, Mykolaiv. Heavy fights in Donbass. And still not a stable situation with the evacuation corridors for civilians. In Odessa, the defenders were waiting for the Russian Navy all night long, but occupiers didn't risk to attack in person. The risk of rocket attacks remains. Near Kherson, one more sudden strike of the Russian army destroyed the helicopter unit at the same place where Ukrainians normally destroy Russian helicopter units. Still, great danger of ecological catastrophe remains in Chernobyl and Zaporizhzhia NPPs. The personnel refuse to leave the power plants, but the situation is uncontrolled. And one more Russian UAV entered NATO territory. This time it made a loop in Poland and left the airspace defended by NATO radars and NATO air defense.
We welcome here our first special guest. This is Daniel Langekamp, a U.S. Embassy press attaché. My greetings to you, Mr. Daniel. Our first question to you goes about the U.S., the possible U.S. Support for Ukraine that is going on in future, meaning that recently the President of United States signed the package about over $13 billion, 13.6 probably billion dollars, and what's exactly this going to be for, like, this package?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'll break it down very simply for you. So $4 billion of this is going to go towards humanitarian assistance. Some of that's going to go inside Ukraine to big humanitarian organizations like the UN, World Food Program, IOM, UNHCR. Some of it will go outside of Ukraine to humanitarian organizations. You know, that includes some NGOs. It includes UNHCR, IOM, other big organizations. So it will be handling the humanitarian assistance from both sides. Another $3 billion of that, which is a very large amount of money, is going to go inside Ukraine to provide more weaponry and more defensive security assistance to Ukraine. So that's $3 billion. As you know, in the last 12 months alone, we've provided more than $1.2 billion to Ukraine. And that's on top of the $2.5 billion that we provided over the last 8 years. Okay, that's a lot of money, essentially $3 billion more dollars for Ukraine. It'll include more anti-aircraft, more anti-tank systems, more, body armor, all kinds of equipment and ammunition for the Ukrainian armed forces. I should say that aside from that, we're also providing tens of millions of dollars that was not included in this to the border guard, to the police, and to other security officials inside Ukraine.
Thank you for this. And I just wanted to propose both our audience and you to come to see the recent address of the Ukrainian president. Today, Volodymyr Zelensky made his statement in the US Congress, and his main point was close sky over Ukraine. Let's see.
Пані та панове,
Ladies and gentlemen, friends, Americans, in your great history you have pages that would allow you to understand Ukrainians, understand us now when we need you right now. Remember Pearl Harbor, terrible morning on December 7, 1941, when your sky was black from the planes attacking you. Just remember it. Remember September 11th, a terrible day in 2001, when evil tried to turn your cities' independent territories in battlefields, when innocent people were attacked from air. Yes, just like no one else expected it, you could not stop it. Our country experienced the same every day. Right now, at this moment, every night for 3 weeks now. Whereas Ukrainian cities, Odessa, Kharkiv, Chernihiv, Sumy, Zhytomyr and Lviv, Mariupol and Dnipro. Russia has turned the Ukrainian sky into a source of death for thousands of people. Russian troops have already fired nearly 1,000 missiles in Ukraine, countless bombs. They use drones to kill us with precision. This is a terror that Europe has not seen for 80 years. And we are asking for a reply, for an answer to this terror from the whole world. Is this a lot to ask for? To create a no-flying zone over Ukraine to save people? Is it too much to ask? A humanitarian no-fly zone, something that Russia would not be able to terrorize our free cities. If this is too much to ask, we offer an alternative. You know what kind of defense system we need. S-300 and other similar systems, you know how much depends on the battlefield, on the ability to use aircrafts.
And we've just seen what Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said in his address. And I reiterate again this. The main question was the closing of the sky above Ukraine. So what's your take, and this is the next question to you, what's your take on this point? Probably in which situation it could be that this once happened, that the humanitarian corridor or the humanitarian fly zone will be closed above Ukraine for Russian aircraft.
Yes, okay. So I don't want to get ahead of our president, who really makes the decisions about this issue. I think one of the things that you saw today in U.S. Congress was an incredible amount of unity in the United States. You had Republicans, you had Democrats, all standing and praising President Zelensky and the efforts that the Ukrainian people are making to fight Russian aggression. That kind of unity, I should say, is very rare in the United States, and it's very, very important for people to realize that we have that kind of unity right now in favor of Ukraine. That's the kind of unity that has allowed for this huge assistance package that we've just passed, the $13.6 billion, which really is a very, very large amount. It's more assistance than we've provided to Ukraine. It's more than 2 times the amount of assistance we've provided to Ukraine since 2014 even. Now, I should say, closing the skies would be a huge decision by the United States. Because it could involve direct combat between U.S. pilots and Russian pilots. That is something that we have said that we are not going to do at this point, but we are going to stand by Ukraine in providing it the kind of defensive assistance that it needs to fight Russia in its country. You have to remember that if we expand this war, if you begin something akin to World War III, Ukraine becomes the epicenter of that. That could be much more dangerous than even having what you have now. You could have more killing. We're trying to avoid this escalation where there's direct combat between the United States and Russia, and so I think that we need to continue to watch this space, and I hope that we will. I know that the United States will continue to stand with Ukraine in its efforts to assert its sovereignty and territorial integrity as we move forward. I must say, like the bravery of the Ukrainian people, the heroism that you see day in and day out from people that are trying to help civilians evacuate, that are fighting Russia in the face of great odds, that are using the assistance that we have given to destroy Russian tanks on a daily basis. The tractors that you're watching right now pulling away Russian defensive systems, these are speaking to people around the world. They're speaking deeply to people inside the United States. I can say that even my own family is deeply affected by these images that are coming from Ukraine. So, we stand with you, and we hope to continue providing assistance as long as it's necessary. While this aggression is continuing. And we will continue to increase pressure. The economic sanctions that you're seeing are having an amazing impact inside Russia. You're starting to see media members fleeing from their channels that they used to work for. You're starting to see oligarchs no longer able to access their capital. You're starting to see the stock market, which is closed because they know that if they opened it, it would crash. The ruble is at its lowest level ever. The noose around Russia is tightening, and we will begin to see these sanctions having an impact. And we believe that Russia will not prevail in this war. I should say that Ukraine will prevail in this war. We're certain of that.
So let's somehow continue with brief answer on the last question, and this is about the if the sky cannot be closed the Euro, so effectively, maybe it's possible to provide the sufficient amount of aircraft or anti-aircraft systems that would close the sky effectively. And is it somehow a plan or not?
Well, so you saw what President Zelensky asked specifically for aircraft from Congress. That's a decision that U.S. leaders will need to make. I must say we are always examining every kind of system, and we're always examining the needs that Ukraine has. I can't promise anything here. That's a decision that the president and his cabinet will have to make carefully. It does play into some of the same issues that we have seen before, where we need to be careful that the conflict doesn't expand. We're trying to, de-escalate and help Ukraine fight the fight that it needs to fight. So I can't make any, I can't get out ahead of the president on this issue. We'll just have to watch this space.
So thank you very much. Here was Daniel Langekamp, and this is a U.S. Embassy press attache. Thank you very much for you being here with us. And now we go for next terrible news from Ukraine. Shelling continues in the city of Severodonetsk in the east of Ukraine. Russian troops do not stop firing at residential buildings at all. The central street of the city is under the gun attacks. Watch more details about what happened in the city in the story of my colleague.
За моей спиной горит жилой дом. A house is on fire behind me. In the city of Severodonetsk, in the east of Ukraine, the troops of the Russian Federation fired at the settlement using Grad multiple launch rocket systems. Now there are about a dozen houses like that. The number of victims is being specified. The shelling continues and it is impossible to put it out because there is no ceasefire. Over the past 3 weeks, more than 100 residential buildings have been damaged. Now you can see what is happening to the high-rise building. Today, I want to show you what Russian troops, the so-called liberators, have done to this city. They continue to shell the city using Grad multiple launch rocket systems and heavy artillery. I want to show you one of the streets. Before the war, it was one of the main streets, Gvardeyski Avenue. This place has always been full of people at any time of the day or night. Now there are practically no people on the streets. This is how, according to the liberators, the Foxtrot shopping center and a number of cafes should look like on one of the central avenues. Take a look at another store on the same central avenue, which looks like this today. Naturally, it doesn't work. And this is what the central branch of Privatbank looks like today. And this is what Comfy looks like today. Water flows, icicles, ice flows. It cannot be repaired because the city continues to be shelled. Our tour continues. This is a shell crater, pretty deep. Houses have been damaged, they have no windows, balconies have been destroyed, and the lives of hundreds of people today have been changed forever. There is nowhere to buy medicines today because pharmacies in many parts of the city look like this. Our excursion continues under heavy artillery fire from the territory of the Russian Federation and from the side of the territories occupied by Russia. There used to be a local market here, which the residents proudly called the Tricky Market. But the Tricky Market is no longer tricky and not a market at all. This is what the market looks like from the inside. Well, here the so-called Russian liberators crashed in on a grand scale. Here is a supermarket, here is a flower shop. This is what the city of Severodonetsk looks like today after attack by Russian soldiers. Reported by Marina Stepanenko, Anastasia Volkova, UATV News.
Welcome here in our studio, our next special guest, and this is John Herbst, the 5th ambassador of the United States to Ukraine. He's been here in 2003-2006. Good evening, Mr. John.
Good evening.
And before the war, the US position on Russia was like this. We are prepared to negotiate, and we are prepared for the escalation. The message was repeatedly reiterated in the days leading to the invasion. The Pentagon, the White House, the State Department, this was a coherent narrative. Thank you for this very much. And now we see that, this is the general question, now we see that, the invasion started. So should we expect a toughening of the US position?
Well, I think the United States position has become tougher as Moscow's aggression has escalated. I don't think it's tough enough. The sanctions we imposed on Russia are amazing, very, very strong. So I don't have any criticism.
Excuse me? This is, for example, in the negotiation process, maybe the tougher position can be expressed through the state on the negotiation process between Russia and Ukraine that is ongoing right now.
It is not for the United States to tell Ukraine what its position should be in these negotiations. Ukraine should understand its interest and defend them in the talks with Moscow. And the United States should support Ukraine as it does that. But I don't think we should be advising Ukraine to do this or not to do that.
And what's your stand on that? What could probably make Russia do some concessions or, give up its... We see what is going on right now over the negotiation process. we see multiple statements by Peskov, by Kremlin, saying that okay, this type of the somehow treaty or decision can be considered, and every time it loses its position 1 inch by another inch. So how do you think, what makes this real, and what eventually can make Russia give up its tough position?
Look, what has to happen is A, Russia needs to feel pain for its aggression, and I think the sanctions do that. But B, Ukraine needs to get all the support it can from the United States, from NATO, in terms of military equipment, so that Russia's military aggression is stopped. And we have provided a fair amount of weapons, and that's all good, but not enough, and not the most advanced systems we should be providing, like high-altitude anti-aircraft shooting missiles, like anti-ship missiles, like anti-ship drone torpedoes, things of that sort.
Recently, just today, the Ukrainian representative in the negotiation process, Mikhailo Podolyak, this is an advisor to the head of the office of the President of Ukraine, he stated that any types of demilitarization of Ukraine that can be proposed during the talks process, this is not the Ukrainian, this is not the version that we can be acceptable. There was noted about some Swedish model or Austrian so-called model, and let's see what our official said about this. Certainly, we understand our partners' attempt to remain a proactive party in the negotiation process. This is where the words about the Swedish and Austrian model of neutrality come from, but Ukraine is now in a state of direct war with Russia. Therefore, the model can only be Ukrainian and only about legally verified security guarantees, and no other models or options. What does this mean? First and foremost, absolute security guarantees, effective ones, not the protocol or Budapest-type assurances. And that means that the signatories of these guarantees would not stand aside in case of an attack on Ukraine as they do today, but they actively participate on the side of Ukraine in the conflict and officially ensure the immediate supply of the necessary amount of weapons to us. Secondly, Ukraine no longer wants to depend on bureaucratic procedures that allow or do not allow us to close the sky from the same cruise missiles. We need direct and firm assurances that the sky will definitely be closed. So the question is, after we've just seen, what's the type of Swedish or Austrian models can be seen even that even they are on the table from the Russian side?
Right. Again, it's not for me to tell the Ukrainian government what their position should be in these talks. But the problem with the Austrian model for Ukraine is that I believe Austria has no real armed forces. And Ukraine has, as we see, a valiant and a capable military. They have defended the nation well from this major Kremlin invasion. And it's hard to imagine, maybe even impossible to imagine, Ukraine giving that up. Although, again, that's not my decision. This is the decision of the people and the government of Ukraine. Sweden, of course, has an effective armed forces, so that model may be more appropriate. But again, this is not my decision.
Thank you very much. This was the 5th ambassador of the United States to Ukraine, John Herbst. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
And by the way, after just recently, the Financial Times outlet published an yet unconfirmed information that the so-called peaceful treaty is considered on the table in the course of the negotiation process between Russian and Ukrainian delegations. Also, it comes amid the statement of Mikhailo Podolyak we've just mentioned. And also he answered to any statements made by Kremlin that each time the new Russian delegation takes new time out for consultations, ends up in a significant deterioration of their negotiation position. And he also said that sooner they sign a peace agreement and get out of Ukraine, and more soldiers and life equipment they will save. So this was probably the official answer to the probable propositions that of any neutral status. And let's go for the next situation that is going on right now in Mariupol. Today, over about 3 p.m., Russian forces opened the attack from the multiple rocket launchers of Grad type against the column of civilians that tried to get out of the Mariupol. Red Cross at the same time did not approve a humanitarian corridor from Mariupol. This was stated by Ukrainian official Vereshchuk. And let's see what she stated.
Добрий ранок, шановні українці.
Good morning, dear Ukrainians. Plans for the work of the humanitarian corridors for March 16th, 2022. As I have already informed you, during the work of humanitarian corridors in the last few weeks, Russia has started gross violations of the ceasefire agreements. The occupiers started firing at humanitarian convoys that consist of buses, shelling settlements, and gathering spots for people from where the evacuation of civilians was planned, as well as taking hostages among escorting personnel. Our rescuer, Oleksiy Danchenko, continues to be in captivity. Just yesterday, the occupiers seized an intensive care hospital in Mariupol. They took 400 civilians hostage, residents of Mariupol, medical staff, and right now they are firing from the hospital. This poses a huge threat to the movement of people through humanitarian corridors. We also did not receive a response to our proposals made yesterday to the International Committee of the Red Cross to open humanitarian corridors today. The issue of organizing humanitarian corridors for Izium and Mariupol remains open today. In such circumstances, we usually cannot safely evacuate people. However, today we continue to work on developing routes for the delivery of humanitarian aid. These are products and medicines for captured or surrounded Ukrainian cities. These include cities and towns of Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, Kharkiv, Kyiv, Chernihiv, Sumy and Kherson regions. I will inform you about all the details and changes of possible humanitarian routes or the opening of new humanitarian corridors during the day. Follow the official announcements. Take care of yourselves. Take care of Ukraine. Everything will be Ukraine.
And now let's go to the topic of Russian propaganda, and we greet here our new guest. This is Anna Brodsky-Krotkina from Washington and Lee University. Hello, Anna.
Hello, thank you for having me.
My next question to you is about the Russian propaganda strategy, and more, and namely, narrowly, about the recent fake activity about Ukraine. For example, let me describe one situation that recently happened on Russian TV. An incident involving an employee of the first channel who broke into the lens of a TV camera during live news broadcast on Russia 1 with the anti-war placard. Surprisingly to many analytics, she was hardly even punished. Let alone the fine was over 30,000 rubles, which is not very, somewhere $250. And many people after that call this a planned action. Exactly this type of propaganda style that sometimes the first channel uses for bleach itself in the eye of society. What do you think? What's your take on it?
Well, I have a different take on the situation. The fact that she wasn't punished so far doesn't mean that she will not be punished later. Also, Russia could punish people in a very clandestine way. We don't know what will happen to her in the next days, weeks, or months. She appeared in the back of the shot, and she was behind the propagandist. I would think that this kind of a demonstration could have been quite effective exactly to work against the Russian propaganda. She is not your general, this young woman whose name is Ovsyannikova, she is not your general protester, not your expected liberal who would generally protest against the war. She is an insider, someone who helps Russian propaganda. She appears at the very back, behind the. She appears behind the a woman who is, is a loyalist of the regime and says, not just no war, stop the war, but she says they're telling you lies here. It is significant because. Channel One tells nothing but lies. And it's significant that she comes from the inside. Therefore, her voice has more weight than actually the voice of protesters. That is one thing. On the other thing is that it was a courageous act. And as I say, we don't know what will happen to her later. And as a courageous act, we all in the West, in America, in Europe, need examples of courage. And of course, people need examples of courage in Russia. If you want to resist the war, you need courage. In America, American consumers need courage and pay high price for gas without complaints. In Europe, big companies who buy oil and gas from Russia need courage to stop it. So in a way, courageous activity can be to an extent contagious and therefore have an important place in anti-propaganda activity.
Thank you, and I just propose you and our audience to see the next material and then continue our discussion. Let's go for it.
They manipulate for dozens of years. They find hundreds of arguments how to justify murders, but they do always kill. Russian propaganda machine works at all possible levels. After the direct lie about no war in Ukraine failed, they lied about non-killing civilians. When that one failed, Russians lied about biological weapons, made provocations, tried to use third parties for influence. Welcome to the new stage of Russian lies. British citizen Graham William Phillips, former worker of Russian propaganda channels Russia Today and Zvezda, sponsored by the Ministry of Defense of Russia, entered the territory of Ukraine hiding behind Russian occupiers. In 2014, he was one of the paid influencers who created a fake image of the first Russian invasion for the West. Now, when these channels are banned, Graham Phillips once again is loyal for the Russian money. It's only lies and destruction that Russia gives the world. New propaganda trend, crying bloggers who seems to feel sorry. But not for killed children or women in Ukraine, they cry for banned Instagram and Facebook. These are also fake tears. Facebook, Instagram and other social networks are still available in Russia, and even the attempts of the Russian government to limit the traffic is easily bypassed by VPN and Asian connections. Fake tears, fake regrets, fake protests. This video was spread around the world as an example of fight for freedom. The lady appears on air on the main Russian internal channel with the anti-war poster. But it is also false. These news issues for the last years never go directly on air. The armed guard at the door do not pass anyone during the broadcast. And a few more details. The anti-war poster on the main internal Russian channel is written in English, when most of the viewers speak only Russian. It was published by the influencers close to Putin himself and obviously with the aim to create some new picture for the West. Add to that pro-Putin demonstrations in the Kremlin's puppet states. But whatever tricks Russia uses to justify the attacks on civilians in Ukraine, there is always one main human law. There can be no excuse for bombing peaceful cities. There is no excuse for killing civilians in captured cities just for fun. There is no excuse for terrorist attacks on women and children. And as long as the civilized countries try to be fair with Russia, the civilization falls.
We can have different takes on what happened in Russia when the employee of the Russian TV made this expression. But at the same time, we all know that Russian propaganda is behind the current situation in Ukraine. And we know that right now what happens that Russian propaganda still is strong, and it still has its influence on the Western minds. What do we know, and what you can tell us about how Westerns react on Russian propaganda right now, and how do they take the situation, how do they take the information that goes from Russian media?
Overall, I'd like to start on a more optimistic note, is that what Zelensky does, and today he spoke to the American Congress, is very, very powerful. And in many ways, he is winning. Zelensky single-handedly, one can say, is winning the war of Putin in terms of the hearts and minds of the West. Today, he added to his speech a video of the destruction that Ukraine suffered, and the members of Congress were literally in tears. It was incredibly emotionally powerful. Having said that, Russian propaganda still penetrates the West, and we see it in the fringes. Unfortunately, we even see it in Congress. We see some members of Congress, a young congressman whose name is Madison Cawthorn, for example, says very unflattering things about Zelensky. I don't want to repeat them, and says Zelensky and his party advocates woke ideologies. We don't know what woke ideologies are. He doesn't elaborate, but he clearly is mimicking what the Russian propaganda is about, and he's on the right. Curiously enough, we also see people on the left, and again, we're not talking about strangers. We're talking about strange people. We're not talking about minor characters. We're talking about the members of Congress. Tulsi Gabbard, she's on the Democratic side, or Ilhan Omar, again on the Democratic side, who again either repeat pieces of Russian propaganda or advocate restraints in sending arms, for example. Clearly, we don't know what this means. Why are they really voicing Russian misinformation? But they're doing this. The good thing is that they are the fringes on the right and the fringes on the left. And that actually brings us to an interesting issue. What is Russian propaganda? For an aggressive authoritarian regime, they basically have no ideology. And this is why the right and the left, the fringes of the right and the fringes of the left, can embrace them. What is Russian ideology? They're not proposing anything for the world, not even anything pernicious. There's no coherent ideas. All we see basically is the theme of victimization. Russia is against, everybody is against Russia. We see the propaganda of obedience to authority, and we see the propaganda of violence. That's all we have. Ultimately, this cannot be appealing to the world at large. It can appeal to the Russians who hear no other information, see no other information. But to the world at large, it's nothing but repulsive.
Thank you very much. And this is the if we've started talking about the Ukrainian president's address in the U.S. Congress, what you just mentioned, when he also proposed for American enterprises to go out from Russia, and he also made the suggestion to create a new alliance of Western countries, creating a peaceful alliance for peace from 24 countries, and probably what do you think? What's going to be after this address? Should it somehow eventually make bring to some results right in next couple days or weeks?
There are two issues here. Of course, banning business from Russia, I think it's very realistic. And indeed, individual congressmen can do that, and they can encourage their constituency. No question about that. even without the political interference. There is a huge wave of public opinion. 80%, more than 80% of Americans feel that Americans should do more to help Ukraine. And a lot of companies, kind of classic, iconic companies from the United States, like Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Pepsi, they moved basically on their own accord. But once a company refused to move on its own accord, we can see the public opinion mobilizing and really forcing the company to leave. The example is Uniqlo. It's a company that sells inexpensive clothing, and it's very popular among the young generations, people between 15 and 35 or 40, and it was popular in Russia, and it was very lucrative in Russia, and it did not want to leave. Their CEO said, "Getting clothing is the human rights, and Russians have the right to live as well." It had a huge backlash. People ultimately said, "If that's the way you behave, we will boycott your companies, and we will not buy your clothing." And of course, lo and behold, the company moved out of Russia. So the pressing business into leaving Russia is absolutely realistic. Both on the level of the government and the mobilized public opinion. Building another coalition right now that would be able to defend Ukraine immediately, that would substitute for NATO. Maybe such a coalition is possible, but it certainly would take a lot more than a few days or a few weeks or in a few months. That is a complicated proposition, and I do not see it happening instantaneously. Maybe in the future.
So thank you for your widened commentary on this issue. And we were here with Anna Brodsky-Krotkina from Washington and Lee University. And Russian drones were spotted in Poland and Croatia. So this is probably this one situation that could have happened and can happen again in future, and can lead to escalation of this war for other countries. On 11th and on 15th of March, unmanned aerial vehicles were spotted over the Polish and Croatian skies, and in Zagreb, one of them was identified as Russian Tu-141. The possibility of accidental shelling in Europe is now real. How shelters work in Western states? Look in our story.
On the 11th of March, a huge UAV marked as Soviet Tu-141 crashed in the suburbs of Croatian Zagreb. This is one of the UAVs that the Russian army widely uses. Nobody was injured. Later, the experts suggested that the operator mixed up Zagreb district Yarun with the village Yarun in Zhytomyr, Ukraine. On the 14th of March, another Russian UAV, Orlan, flew 80 kilometers into Romania before running out of gas. No one knows what was the target, but the main question is not about the intellect of Russian troops, it is about defending capabilities of NATO itself. How did the heavy big UAV cross the borders and got to Zagreb? How did Orlan get so far? And what will happen when it's bomb or rocket? How many countries are ready for sudden shelling of residential districts as it happened in Kharkiv, Mariupol, Irpin, Chernihiv or Sumy?
И когда вы грозите России очередными санкциями, в задницу себе их засуньте, трубочкой сверните, в задницу и знайте, Путин вам сказал, инфраструктуру НАТО на границе 97-го года. Ядерное оружие в те страны, которым оно принадлежит. И если вы считаете, что мы остановимся на Украине, Подумайте 300 раз.
So ask yourself, is Europe well prepared? Most of the cities that should have remembered World War II do not have bomb shelters or infrastructure equipped due to the Russian threat. Damage will be enormous. In Germany, there are still a few bomb shelters. Most of them were turned into art spaces or residential areas. Not all of them are actually underground, and none of those on the ground are ready to resist modern bombs and rockets. Not talking about quantity, there will not be enough space. After the war, Germans didn't build new ones. France doesn't have bomb shelters, at least widely spread, but also has problems with underground parkings where people hide in Ukraine. Problems with electricity caused death in parking during the recent floods on French Riviera. When Russians start bombing, people risk to get blocked inside. Barcelona does have several bomb shelters, but the quantity is obviously not enough for the overpopulated city, and their availability also should be checked regularly. The same situation in Valencia, where the old bomb shelters were turned into museums, so at least memory will remain there. There is also an important note for the south of Europe due to Ukrainian experience. While in Ukraine people hide from bombs in basements, the warm European countries do not have solid constructions because of different climate, and the basement in this case will not help. None of the European countries today provides regular trainings for civilians on how to behave in case of shelling. Not many provide regular trainings on the first medical aid. But in the world there are states that are better prepared for such situations. In Singapore there are not just common shelters but also private ones. Modern buildings are being constructed with a special safe area where you will be protected from blast or blast fragments. Australians may hide in basements. Most of the houses there are well built and the basements are solid. In USA, instead of bomb shelters, there are tornado drills and tornado-safe places. People have to be prepared due to the climate. This war is already not measured by Ukraine, and not able to unite and stop Russia now. Europe, the world, should get prepared. Here are some main rules in case of Russian attacks on civilians. When you hear air alert, urgently move to the closest bomb shelter or basement. If you're inside the building, stay 2 walls away from the windows. Train your first aid skills now, tomorrow may be too late. Prepare your children for war. And fight as one. Don't wait when the world comes to help. It's always late.
President Zelensky, in his recent address, stated that all Ukrainian towns affected by Russian shelling will be rebuilt in the nearest future after the victory, and assumingly at the expense of the Russian reparatory payments. But right now, Ukrainian peaceful regions are the rear and economical back of Ukraine that finances the Ukrainian Ukrainian defensive capabilities. Many establishments and companies have resumed their work in order to help the state and Ukrainian economy to revitalize it. Some 80 enterprises from the eastern center decided to move to Lviv to start their work in Lviv region, and here our next story about them. Our correspondent will tell you about some insights from Lviv.
We are preparing rice now. We will have rice with vegetables, meat in a creamy sauce for the children, and the girls are making salads.
Sushi and pizza restaurants with the beginning of the war began to prepare food for refugees at the railway station, for hospitals and for the children. In the first days, when a lot of people came to Lviv, a small team of cooks and employees of the establishment prepared from 1,000 to 2,000 portions.
People joined, volunteers brought a lot of vegetables, potatoes, carrots, also meat. With these products, we prepared dinners, lunches at railway stations, hospitals, checkpoints.
Only recently, the team realized that it is necessary to resume the normal work of the enterprise, so now they have opened restaurants for visitors and in parallel continue to cook for refugees.
We realize that business should work. We need to support the economy of Ukraine. Of course, we do not do as much as our defenders at the front, but everyone does everything the best he can. So we launched a business so that it continues to work, and we give a part of the money to support the armed forces of Ukraine.
Some Lviv enterprises did not stop even for a day. Yulia, the manager of the restaurant, says that they worked in full at the beginning of the war because they knew that they needed to support the country's economic front.
We did not close our restaurant because we understand that the economy of Ukraine needs the support, and in order to send money to the army, we must earn it.
For 2 days, the Lviv Regional Military Administration received 78 requests to change the place of doing business from the territories where hostilities are taking place. These are companies producing plastic, spare parts for heavy transport, tea and light industry enterprises. Logistics has already been provided for 31 of them. Equipment and components for these industries are already being transported to Lviv region.
In general, 276 proposals have been provided to such business to date. Already 31 enterprises have announced the initiative of complete relocation, and right now they are making counteraction obligations with the owners of the premises.
The leadership of the Lviv region emphasizes that the economy must work. Entrepreneurs are encouraged to go to work, call staff, provide them with work and wages. IDPs are also called to find jobs. Reported by Olena Shustova, Yulia Bil, Lviv, UATV News.
This was our final story for today. Thank you for being with us with UA English broadcast for the last hour, and we'll see you tomorrow again. Good evening, goodbye.